In the summer of 1980, a meticulously planned vault breach in downtown San Francisco stripped away $4.6 million in bearer bonds and cash certificates in what would become one of the most sophisticated financial thefts on the West Coast. No alarms sounded, no witnesses came forward, and no suspects emerged from the shadows. The perpetrators vanished as cleanly as the money itself, leaving behind only an empty vault and decades of unanswered questions. For 44 years, the case gathered dust in federal archives, another unsolved puzzle that time had seemingly buried forever. But in 2024, a routine Medicare registration in Phoenix, Arizona, triggered an automated identity verification that would crack open a cold case the FBI had long considered untouchable. What began as a simple health care enrollment became the thread that unraveled one of the longest-running financial mysteries in California history. A single Social Security number, flagged by algorithmic cross-referencing systems that didn't exist in 1980, suddenly connected a retired insurance adjuster named Robert Chen to a phantom identity that had been living quietly in plain sight for nearly half a century. The discovery would expose not just the mechanics of a nearly flawless heist, but the patient discipline of criminals who understood that the greatest theft isn't taking the money. It's making everyone forget it ever existed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Montgomery Federal Savings Building stood 12 stories above Market Street in 1980, its granite facade and bronze fixtures projecting the steady confidence that depositors expected from a financial institution handling high-value securities. The building housed not just retail banking operations, but a specialized vault system designed for storing negotiable instruments, bearer bonds, and certified investment documents for wealthy clients across Northern California. Unlike standard bank vaults focused on cash deposits, this facility catered to a more discreet clientele, individuals and corporations who preferred to keep their most liquid assets in physical form, away from electronic tracking systems and federal oversight. The vault itself occupied the entire basement level, accessible only through a single reinforced entrance guarded by dual authentication protocols. During business hours, 2 employees were required to be present for any vault access, each carrying separate keycards and memorized numeric codes. After 6 p.m., the facility operated under enhanced security, with motion sensors, pressure plates, and a direct line to a private security firm that promised response times under 4 minutes. The system had been installed 3 years earlier and had never experienced a single breach or false alarm. On the evening of August 23, 1980, that record was about to change in the most unusual way possible. At 11:47 p.m., as the last of the office workers departed the upper floors and the building settled into its overnight quiet, the vault's security grid registered a brief anomaly. For exactly 14 seconds, the motion detection system in the basement corridor showed inactive status before resuming normal operation. The monitoring station noted the blip, but attributed it to a minor electrical fluctuation, common in older buildings during the late summer heat. No alerts were triggered, no personnel were dispatched, and no follow-up investigation was scheduled. What the security monitors didn't capture was far more significant than what they recorded. During those 14 seconds of darkness, 3 individuals had moved through the basement corridor with the practiced efficiency of people who had studied every inch of the building's layout. They wore dark maintenance coveralls and carried tool bags that appeared consistent with after-hours repair work. Their faces were partially obscured by caps and work masks, common among contractors dealing with dust and chemical cleaning agents. Most importantly, they moved without haste, without the nervous energy that typically accompanies criminal activity. They walked like employees with legitimate business in the building. The leader of the group, a compact man in his 30s with calloused hands and precise movements, approached the vault entrance with a confidence that suggested intimate familiarity with the security protocols. From his tool bag, he withdrew not the crude implements of a typical break-in, but sophisticated electronic devices that interfaced directly with the vault's locking mechanism. These weren't tools purchased from criminal suppliers or improvised in basement workshops. They were precision instruments, possibly custom-built, designed to communicate with the specific model of security system installed in the Montgomery building. The two men who accompanied him took positions at either end of the corridor, not as lookouts scanning for threats, but as technicians monitoring the building's ambient systems. One carried a device that appeared to track electrical patterns throughout the structure, while the other held equipment that seemed designed to detect changes in air pressure or temperature. Their coordination was seamless, the product of extensive rehearsal and meticulous planning. This was not a crime of opportunity or desperation. It was a calculated operation executed by individuals with professional expertise and insider knowledge. Within 18 minutes, the vault door opened with the soft mechanical hum of motors designed to operate silently. No alarms sounded because, from the system's perspective, the vault was being accessed through proper channels. The electronic signature matched authorized protocols, the timing fell within acceptable parameters, and the sequence of commands followed the exact pattern programmed into the security matrix. The vault's own sophisticated defenses had been turned into accomplices, convinced that they were facilitating legitimate access rather than enabling a multi-million-dollar theft. Inside the vault, rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, each containing documents, jewelry, or cash belonging to the building's most affluent clients. But the three men ignored these individual repositories entirely. Their target was far more specific and infinitely more valuable. In the center of the vault stood a series of reinforced cabinets designed to hold bearer instruments and negotiable securities. Unlike registered stocks or bonds, these documents required no ownership verification and could be converted to cash by anyone in possession of the physical certificates. They were, in effect, untraceable currency in paper form. The men worked with surgical precision, selecting specific cabinets and ignoring others. They opened each targeted container using the same electronic methods that had defeated the primary vault entrance, suggesting that their infiltration of the security system was comprehensive rather than limited to a single access point. From the opened cabinets, they removed sealed portfolios containing bearer bonds issued by major corporations, municipal certificates from various California cities, and federal treasury instruments that could be liquidated through established financial networks without triggering immediate scrutiny. The selection process revealed extensive prior knowledge of the vault's contents. The men didn't waste time examining documents or evaluating potential value. They knew exactly which cabinets held the most liquid assets and which certificates could be converted most easily. This intelligence could only have come from someone with direct access to client records, inventory logs, or the specialized knowledge that comes from years of working within the financial industry. The theft wasn't just about bypassing security systems. It was about understanding the complex ecosystem of high-value paper instruments and knowing how to extract maximum profit while minimizing detection risk. Within 43 minutes of entering the vault, the three men had loaded their tool bags with approximately $4.6 million worth of negotiable instruments. The figure would later be established through painstaking reconstruction of missing certificates, but at the time, the precise value remained unknown, because the theft had been executed with such specificity that initial inventory checks missed the scope of the loss. The men had taken enough to ensure substantial profit while leaving enough behind to delay discovery. They understood that the longer their crime went unnoticed, the greater their chances of successful escape. As they prepared to leave, the leader of the group made one final check of the vault interior. He ensured that the opened cabinets were properly closed and that no obvious signs of disturbance remained visible. The floor was swept clean of any debris. The lighting was restored to its original configuration, and the temperature controls were reset to their standard overnight settings. When the vault door sealed shut, the chamber looked exactly as it had before their arrival. The only evidence of their presence was the absence of documents that wouldn't be missed until the next scheduled inventory review, weeks or possibly months in the future. The return journey through the building's basement was executed with the same methodical care that had characterized their entry. The security system's 14-second window reappeared, providing cover for their exit through the same route they had used to enter. By 12:44 a.m. on August 24th, the Montgomery Federal Savings Building had returned to its normal overnight status. The security monitors showed no anomalies. The vault registered as properly sealed, and the building's electronic systems indicated that all protocols remained intact. What had just occurred would not be discovered for another 6 weeks. The discovery came not through diligent security reviews or suspicious financial activity, but through the methodical routine of quarterly audits that Montgomery Federal Savings conducted to satisfy federal regulatory requirements. On October 7, 1980, Senior Auditor Margaret Holloway arrived at the building carrying clipboards and inventory sheets for what she expected to be a standard verification of high-value holdings. The process typically took 2 days and involved cross-referencing physical certificates against client records and insurance documentation. Holloway had conducted similar audits for nearly a decade and approached the task with practiced efficiency. She began with the smaller denomination instruments, working her way systematically through each cabinet in the vault. The first several hours proceeded normally, with certificates accounted for and properly documented. But as she reached the central storage units containing the highest value bearer bonds, discrepancies began to emerge that couldn't be explained by simple clerical errors. Initially, the missing documents appeared to be isolated cases: a single municipal bond from Alameda County, a corporate certificate from Pacific Gas and Electric, and a Treasury instrument dated from the previous year. Holloway assumed the items had been relocated during routine maintenance or temporarily removed for client transactions. But as the audit continued, the pattern of missing certificates expanded beyond what could be attributed to administrative oversight. By the end of the first day, Holloway had identified over 30 missing instruments with a combined face value exceeding $1.8 million. The discovery prompted an immediate escalation to senior management and the initiation of emergency protocols designed for potential security breaches. The building was quietly sealed. Additional auditors were brought in from the corporate office, and a comprehensive review of all vault contents was ordered. The full scope of the theft emerged over the following week as teams of investigators worked around the clock to reconstruct exactly what had been taken. The final tally revealed that 87 separate instruments had been removed, including bearer bonds issued by major corporations, municipal certificates from various California jurisdictions, and federal Treasury notes with maturity dates spanning the next 15 years. The total value reached $4.6 million, making it one of the largest thefts of negotiable securities in West Coast history. What puzzled investigators was not just the scale of the theft, but its surgical precision. The missing instruments had been selected with obvious expertise, targeting documents that could be easily liquidated, while avoiding certificates that carried specific tracking mechanisms or unusual identification markers. The thieves had demonstrated intimate knowledge of financial instruments, understanding which bonds could be converted through standard channels and which would trigger immediate scrutiny from regulatory authorities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation assumed control of the case within 48 hours of the discovery. Special Agent Patricia Reeves, who specialized in financial crimes, arrived from the San Francisco field office with a team of forensic accountants and security analysts. Their initial assessment confirmed what local investigators had already suspected. This was not the work of opportunistic criminals or street-level thieves. The operation required sophisticated planning, technical expertise, and insider knowledge that suggested professional execution. Reeves ordered a comprehensive review of all building employees, from senior management to overnight maintenance staff. Background checks were expanded to include family members, financial records, and recent behavioral changes that might indicate sudden wealth or unusual stress. The security firm responsible for monitoring the building was subjected to similar scrutiny, with particular attention paid to personnel who had access to system specifications or override protocols. The investigation also focused on the technical aspects of the break-in. Forensic analysis of the vault's electronic systems revealed evidence of sophisticated tampering that required specialized knowledge of the manufacturer's security protocols. The intrusion had been accomplished without damaging any physical components, suggesting that the perpetrators had either obtained legitimate access codes or possessed equipment capable of mimicking authorized entry signals. Despite extensive investigation, the trail remained frustratingly cold. No fingerprints were recovered from the vault interior, no surveillance footage captured suspicious activity, and no witnesses reported unusual behavior in or around the building during the relevant time period. The thieves had operated with the kind of professional discipline that left virtually no physical evidence behind. More troubling was the absence of any subsequent criminal activity that could be traced to the stolen instruments. Bearer bonds and negotiable certificates typically surface in the financial system when converted to cash, creating paper trails that investigators can follow. But months passed without any of the Montgomery instruments appearing in legitimate markets or being flagged by banking institutions. The documents had simply vanished, as if they had never existed. The FBI expanded their investigation to include known fencing operations, underground financial networks, and international money laundering schemes. Agents consulted with Treasury Department specialists who understood the global markets for stolen securities. But every lead evaporated under scrutiny, and every potential suspect was eliminated through alibi verification or lack of technical capability. As 1980 drew to a close, the Montgomery federal savings case began to take on the characteristics of a perfect crime. The perpetrators had demonstrated technical sophistication, operational discipline, and strategic patience that placed them in a different category from typical financial criminals. They had stolen millions of dollars worth of negotiable instruments and disappeared without leaving behind any actionable evidence or investigative leads. Agent Reeves compiled her final report in January 1981, acknowledging that despite exhaustive investigation, the case remained unsolved. The report documented every aspect of the inquiry, from technical analysis of the security breach to comprehensive background checks of potential suspects. It concluded that the theft had been executed by a small group of highly skilled individuals with professional expertise in both security systems and financial instruments. The stolen certificates were entered into national databases maintained by the Treasury Department and Federal Reserve, ensuring that any attempt to liquidate them through legitimate channels would trigger immediate alerts. Insurance claims were processed, and Montgomery Federal Savings implemented enhanced security protocols designed to prevent similar breaches. But the perpetrators themselves remained ghosts, and the $4.6 million in stolen instruments remained missing. Over the following years, the case file was periodically reviewed whenever similar crimes occurred or new investigative techniques became available. Advances in forensic science prompted occasional re-examination of physical evidence, while improvements in computer technology enabled more sophisticated analysis of financial patterns and suspect networks. But despite these efforts, the Montgomery theft remained stubbornly unsolved. By the late 1980s, the case had been reclassified as inactive, though it remained officially open pending new developments. The original investigators had retired or moved to other assignments, and institutional memory of the details began to fade. The stolen instruments remained in federal databases, but the practical likelihood of recovery or prosecution diminished with each passing year. The case might have remained permanently cold, buried under decades of newer crimes and changing investigative priorities. But in 2024, a routine Medicare enrollment in Phoenix, Arizona, would trigger an automated cross-reference that had been waiting 44 years to make a connection. A Social Security number, flagged by systems that didn't exist in 1980, would finally provide the thread that investigators needed to unravel one of the most sophisticated financial thefts in California history. What had started as a perfect crime was about to become an imperfect cover-up, exposed not by brilliant detective work or lucky breaks, but by the relentless expansion of digital identity verification systems that left no shadow dark enough to hide in forever. The Medicare enrollment process in 2024 bore little resemblance to the paper-based systems that had existed when the Montgomery Vault was breached 4 decades earlier. What once required manual verification through physical documents and telephone calls had evolved into an automated network of cross-referenced databases that could flag discrepancies in milliseconds. When 67-year-old Robert Chen submitted his application for Medicare benefits in Phoenix, Arizona, he likely expected the same routine processing that millions of Americans experienced each year. Instead, his enrollment triggered a cascade of automated alerts that would resurrect a case the federal government had long forgotten. The initial flag appeared innocuous enough. Chen's Social Security number, issued in California in 1956, showed a gap in employment history between 1979 and 1982. Such discontinuities weren't unusual for individuals who had worked in cash-based businesses, overseas assignments, or periods of unemployment that predated comprehensive digital record-keeping. But Medicare's fraud prevention algorithms had grown increasingly sophisticated, designed to detect identity theft and benefits fraud through pattern recognition that human investigators might miss. The system noted that Chen's Social Security number had been associated with tax filings in Nevada during the early 1980s, despite his Medicare application listing continuous California residency. More curious was the absence of any credit history, bank accounts, or utility records under his name during that same period. The algorithmic analysis flagged these discrepancies as potentially fraudulent, automatically forwarding Chen's file to the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General for manual review. Senior investigator Maria Santos had spent 12 years reviewing Medicare fraud cases, most involving healthcare providers billing for non-existent services or beneficiaries using stolen identities to obtain prescription drugs. When Chen's file crossed her desk, she initially assumed it represented another routine identity theft case, probably involving someone who had assumed a deceased person's Social Security number decades earlier. But as she began her investigation, the details refused to align with typical fraud patterns. Chen's identity appeared legitimate in most respects. He had a valid California driver's license dating back to 1975, employment records with a Phoenix insurance company spanning 15 years, and tax filings that showed consistent but modest income. His credit history, while thin, contained no obvious red flags or suspicious activity. Most identity thieves left messy trails of financial exploitation, but Chen's record suggested someone who had lived quietly and conservatively for decades. What caught Santos's attention was the precision of the gaps in Chen's documented history. The missing period corresponded exactly with the years when someone establishing a new identity might need time to build credible background documentation. The Nevada tax filings, when cross-referenced with state employment records, showed payments to a construction company that had gone out of business in 1983. The timing suggested someone who had used temporary work to establish initial documentation before transitioning to a more permanent identity. Santos decided to expand her investigation beyond the standard Medicare fraud protocols. She requested Chen's complete federal tax history, cross-referenced his Social Security number against FBI databases, and initiated background checks that reached back to the 1970s. The process took several weeks, but what emerged was a picture of someone who had appeared in the federal system with remarkable suddenness in the early 1980s, almost as if he had materialized from nothing. The breakthrough came when Santos discovered that Chen's Social Security number had been flagged in a 1981 FBI investigation related to fraudulent identity documents. The reference was brief, contained in a report about fake driver's licenses and birth certificates being produced in Las Vegas, but it mentioned Chen's number as one of several that had been associated with suspected false documentation. The investigation had been closed without prosecution, but the reference remained in federal databases, waiting for someone to make the connection. Santos contacted the FBI field office in San Francisco, explaining that she had uncovered what appeared to be a decades-old false identity case during a routine Medicare fraud investigation. The agent who took her call, David Morrison, had joined the Bureau long after the Montgomery Vault case had gone cold, but he understood the significance of identity fraud investigations that reached back to the early 1980s. He agreed to review Chen's background and cross-reference it against unsolved cases from that era. Morrison's database search produced an unexpected result. Chen's Social Security number appeared in the peripheral files of the Montgomery Federal Savings Investigation, not as a suspect, but as part of the comprehensive background checks that had been conducted on building employees and contractors. The connection was tangential at best. Someone who had worked briefly for a janitorial service that held a contract with the building's management company. But the timing was significant, placing Chen in the orbit of the Montgomery building during the months preceding the vault breach. The discovery prompted Morrison to request the complete Montgomery case file from federal archives. The documents, stored on microfilm and largely forgotten, painted a picture of one of the most sophisticated financial thefts in California history. As Morrison reviewed the evidence, he began to see potential connections that the original investigators had missed. The technical expertise required for the vault breach, the insider knowledge of the building's layout, and the surgical precision of the theft all suggested perpetrators with professional skills and patient planning. Chen's background, viewed through the lens of the Montgomery investigation, took on new significance. His employment history showed experience with electronic systems and security equipment, skills that would have been essential for bypassing the vault's sophisticated defenses. His financial records indicated periods of unexplained income that coincided with the years immediately following the theft. Most tellingly, his emergence as Robert Chen in the early 1980s aligned perfectly with someone who might have needed to establish a new identity after committing a high-profile crime. Morrison shared his findings with Santos, and together they developed a strategy for investigating Chen without alerting him to their suspicions. The Medicare fraud inquiry provided perfect cover, allowing them to conduct extensive background checks under the guise of routine benefits verification. They obtained surveillance authorization and began monitoring Chen's activities in Phoenix, looking for behavior patterns or financial transactions that might confirm their growing suspicions. The surveillance revealed a man who lived with remarkable consistency and caution. Chen maintained a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and worked part-time as a consultant for insurance companies evaluating property damage claims. His social interactions were limited, his spending patterns conservative, and his daily routines predictable. He appeared to be exactly what his Medicare application claimed, a retired insurance adjuster seeking health care benefits. But beneath the surface of Chen's ordinary life, investigators began to notice details that suggested a more complex reality. His apartment contained sophisticated electronic equipment that seemed excessive for someone with his stated income and interests. His bookshelves held technical manuals related to security systems and financial instruments, subjects that appeared unrelated to his professional background. Most significantly, he maintained multiple bank accounts across different states, a financial structure that provided flexibility and anonymity uncommon among retirees. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Morrison discovered that Chen had made regular trips to Nevada during the 1980s and 1990s, always paying in cash and always staying in different hotels. The pattern suggested someone maintaining connections to criminal networks or conducting business that required anonymity. More intriguingly, several of these trips coincided with dates when stolen bearer bonds from other West Coast thefts had surfaced in Las Vegas financial markets. Morrison expanded his investigation to include other unsolved securities thefts from the 1980s, looking for patterns that might connect Chen to a broader criminal enterprise. What he found was a series of sophisticated vault breaches and document thefts that shared remarkable similarities with the Montgomery case. The perpetrators had demonstrated similar technical expertise, operational discipline, and strategic patience. Most significantly, several of these crimes had occurred in cities where Chen's financial records showed unexplained travel or temporary employment. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling enough to warrant a federal grand jury investigation. Morrison and Santos compiled their findings into a comprehensive report that traced Chen's activities across 4 decades, documenting the suspicious gaps in his identity, the technical skills that matched the Montgomery theft requirements, and the financial patterns that suggested involvement in high-value criminal activity. As federal prosecutors reviewed the case, they faced the challenge of building a prosecution around evidence that was largely inferential. Chen had lived carefully for 44 years, avoiding the kind of obvious mistakes that typically expose long-term fugitives. His identity as Robert Chen appeared legitimate in most respects, and his current lifestyle provided no direct evidence of criminal activity. But the accumulated weight of coincidences, timing, and specialized knowledge created a picture that was difficult to dismiss as mere chance. The decision to move forward with the investigation represented a significant commitment of federal resources to a case that might never result in prosecution. But the sophistication of the original crime, the substantial value of the stolen instruments, and the potential connections to other unsolved cases made it impossible to ignore. After 44 years of silence, the Montgomery Vault case was about to emerge from the shadows, driven not by new evidence or witness testimony, but by the inexorable expansion of digital surveillance systems that made it increasingly difficult for anyone to remain invisible forever. The Medicare enrollment that had started the investigation continued to process through automated systems, unaware that it had triggered the resurrection of one of the FBI's most challenging cold cases. Robert Chen, still waiting for his benefits to be approved, had no idea that his routine application for health care coverage had connected him to a crime committed when digital databases existed only in science fiction and identity verification required little more than a social security card and a believable story. The federal task force assembled to investigate Robert Chen represented a convergence of expertise that would have been impossible during the original 1980 investigation. Digital forensic specialists worked alongside veteran financial crimes agents, while Medicare fraud investigators provided insights into identity verification systems that had evolved far beyond what the Montgomery Vault thieves could have anticipated. The team understood that they were pursuing not just a single suspect, but potentially unraveling a criminal operation that had remained hidden for nearly half a century. Chen's arrest came on a quiet Tuesday morning in October 2024, executed with the kind of methodical precision that had characterized the original crime. Federal agents approached his Phoenix apartment with warrants for fraud investigation and identity verification, carefully avoiding any mention of the Montgomery case. Chen answered the door calmly, showing no surprise at their presence, as if he had been expecting this moment for decades. During the initial interview, Chen maintained the persona he had cultivated for 44 years. He was Robert Chen, a retired insurance adjuster with a modest background and unremarkable history. But as investigators presented evidence of his fraudulent identity, the financial inconsistencies, and the technical knowledge that connected him to the Montgomery theft, his carefully constructed facade began to crack. The breakthrough came when agents showed Chen photographs of the stolen bearer bonds, documents that had never been publicly released and were known only to the original investigators and the perpetrators themselves. His reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a momentary flicker of recognition that betrayed decades of practiced denial. In that instant, the distance between Robert Chen and the Montgomery vault collapsed entirely. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of federal prosecution for identity fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy charges that carried substantial prison sentences, Chen made a decision that would finally close one of the FBI's most enduring mysteries. After 44 years of silence, he began to talk. His confession revealed the Montgomery theft as part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had operated across the western United States during the early 1980s. Chen, whose real name was David Liu, had been part of a three-man team specializing in high-value document theft. They had targeted banks, savings institutions, and private vaults that held negotiable securities. Using technical expertise gained through legitimate employment in security and electronics industries, the Montgomery job had been their masterpiece, requiring months of planning and insider intelligence that Liu had gathered through his brief employment with the building's janitorial contractor. He had studied the vault systems, memorized security protocols, and identified the precise timing windows that would allow undetected entry. The electronic devices used to bypass the locks had been custom-built by his partner, a former military electronics specialist who understood sophisticated security systems better than their manufacturers. Liu's confession also solved several other cold cases from the same era. The team had been responsible for at least 6 major thefts across California, Nevada, and Arizona, stealing millions in bearer bonds and negotiable certificates that they had laundered through underground financial networks in Las Vegas and Mexico. The operation had ended not through law enforcement pressure, but through the natural dissolution that comes when criminals grow older, more cautious, and increasingly aware of their mortality. The stolen Montgomery instruments had been converted to cash through a complex network of intermediaries who specialized in laundering stolen securities. Liu had received approximately $1.8 million as his share, money that he had used to establish his Robert Chen identity and build the modest but secure life he had maintained for 4 decades. The remaining team members had taken similar paths, disappearing into new identities and quiet existences that had protected them until now. As federal prosecutors prepared their case, they faced the complex challenge of balancing justice with the passage of time. Liu was now 71 years old, in declining health, and had lived as a law-abiding citizen for over 40 years. His crimes, while serious, belonged to a different era when security systems were primitive and identity verification was largely manual. The question became whether pursuing maximum penalties served justice or merely satisfied institutional memory. The resolution came through a negotiated plea agreement that acknowledged both the severity of Liu's original crimes and the reality of his intervening decades as Robert Chen. He pled guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and tax evasion charges, receiving a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release and substantial financial penalties. The agreement required full cooperation with ongoing investigations into other unsolved cases from the same era. More significantly, Liu's confession provided closure for the Montgomery federal savings case that had haunted investigators for nearly half a century. The sophisticated planning, technical execution, and disciplined aftermath that had made the crime seem perfect were finally understood as the work of professionals who had simply been patient enough to outlast conventional investigation methods. The case officially closed in December 2024, 44 years and 4 months after the vault was breached. The stolen bearer bonds, long since converted and spent, were formally written off as unrecoverable. But the resolution provided something more valuable than financial recovery. It demonstrated that even the most carefully planned crimes leave traces that may remain dormant for decades before emerging through the expanding web of digital surveillance and automated verification systems. Liu began serving his sentence in early 2025, finally paying the price for a crime committed when he was a young man in a very different world. His story became a cautionary tale about the impossibility of permanent escape in an age of comprehensive digital tracking. The Robert Chen identity that had protected him for 4 decades ultimately became the evidence that exposed him, proof that in the modern era, no one can truly disappear forever. The Montgomery Vault, long since converted to standard banking space, bore no trace of the sophisticated theft that had once made it famous within law enforcement circles. But the case file, finally marked closed, stood as testament to the patient persistence of justice and the inexorable power of time to reveal even the most carefully guarded secrets.